Why don't you take a seat and tell me what appears to be the problem? Alright, so I have a new microphone. My friend sent me this. She retired and then she sent me this. So, with magnificent audio quality ahead of us for these kinds of videos, I thought we would do another Consult the Doctor. I have 4 questions and I'll get started straight away. So the first question I thought was a very good one. This was a person who said, I'm a little worried about eyedroppering pens because of burping of ink. Then how about the Opus 88? I have, for the record, also fixed the white balance on this camera so that it is at least consistent. Okay, so what is burping ink? Burping ink, in a nutshell, means that you use a pen which has a large ink reservoir, and once in a while, bloop, bloop, you're writing and it's bloop, just ink blobs out of the nib and feed. The explanation that I have read, and not read, but actually heard about for that is something along the lines of, as the ink level goes down, the amount of air in the main reservoir doesn't really expand, but it I don't know how to express myself today. As the ink level goes down, the amount of air goes up, right? Relatively speaking, there's more and more air because there's less and less ink. I hope that makes sense. I think physicists would probably shout at me because there's not more air, but you know what I mean. Relatively speaking, there's more air because there's less ink. So as the ink goes down, the air goes up. Okay, let's stick with that. Now, from the way I always understood this issue is that you have a bubble of air in there, and air, when it gets hot, that will expand. And when it expands, then it might push out ink. Now, I've also read some opinions from people who said, well, that's not possible. That's not what causes ink burping. I always thought it was an intuitive explanation. So if, for all my physicist/engineering friends, I would really appreciate it if you would weigh in on this and would say, well, you know, this is obviously impossible. Daniel, I'm looking at you. Now, having said that, assuming that this is correct, yeah, that's an issue. And in an eyedropper-filled pen, which just has a big reservoir and no way to stop ink flow, I do agree that that could be an issue. Whether it is the expansion of air or something else, because I think the argument was you don't generate enough heat to make that air expand. I don't know about that. Some people have very hot hands and other people don't. So I can see that explanation being true, but I'm not a physicist or an engineer. Now, what about the Opus 88? Why was that specifically asked about? Well, that is a pen that looks like this, for example. This is the Opus 88 Omar, and I specifically selected this because you can see this internal mechanism. Now, when I open this up, right, this is called a one-way shut-off valve. Theoretically, you could pull this out like this, but it's not really necessary. So the way you fill this pen is use an eyedropper, put in ink, screw in the section again, not like that, because the ink would flow out. And here you have that stopper, which when this turning knob is screwed in all the way, that knob has a little seal at the end. Sorry, this rod has a little seal at the end, and it stops ink from getting into this secondary air chamber. Now, when you open that up, ink will flow in, there will be ink in this chamber, and you can write, and it might be a little wetter than if you close this off. And at some point, if you keep it closed, the ink here is going to run out, or a vacuum is drawn. There's no more, as the ink comes out, no more air coming in. It just stops writing. I have certainly experienced that. Now, imagine the system and imagine what happens. If you keep this shut-off valve opened up as you write, I suppose it may burp more ink. I use these pens in such a way that I make sure there is ink in that secondary chamber, and then I close this off again. And I will say, I have never had any issues with burping ink. So if that truly is a concern, you can get one of these pens. You will have the big ink capacity because you fill this whole barrel with ink. It's a big capacity. And that's pretty much the end of it. So, consider that. That was a more abrupt ending than I thought it would be, but I said all I needed to say. Next question. Would you use a valuable vintage pen or store it as a collector's item? There is certainly no right or wrong answer to that question, but my personal viewpoint has always been, if you have a pen, then also use it. I don't see the point in owning an object that is meant to be used and then not using it. Now, I certainly appreciate the viewpoint of, no, but it's an antique, you're trying to preserve it for future generations or something. But future generations may not give crap about that particular pen. So I'm not sure how useful that approach of, well, let me really conserve this and put it in a cabinet somewhere and then never use it. I'm not sure how useful that is. And for me, it would be really sad. I would feel very sad to own a pen that I can never use because I'm trying to preserve it. Again, I certainly understand the philosophy behind that, but it's not my way of doing things. If I have a pen, even if it's an expensive pen, I will use it. It's a different matter if you really want to talk about resale value, because certainly if you have a valuable pen, whether that is vintage or not, if it is truly valuable, it's a limited edition, it's special. I'm thinking of something like Mont Blanc, writer's editions, stuff like that. Some of those can actually appreciate. They can actually go up in value, but then you really should not use them. But then you're not talking about a pen, then you're talking about an investment. And to keep that investment safe, you would indeed not use it. The shortest answer for me is, what's the fun in getting a pen and then never using it? That's just not how I work. Okay. Next question. I guess it's not a good idea to use ultrasonic cleaners and ebonite feeds. Now, I talked about ultrasonic cleaners in a previous episode and about whether they're safe or not. And one of the issues that someone brought up, and actually a couple people brought up that I thought was very interesting, was some online report of someone who destroyed a Mont Blanc in an ultrasonic cleaner. And the idea was that ultrasonic cleaners, if you're not familiar with them, you put in water and then they have sort of ultrasonic vibration, and that vibration causes bits of old ink or whatever to kind of be shaken loose and they will just flow out. But in that process, the water also warms up. So I guess theoretically it's possible that if you keep doing that, you end up with boiling water. I mean, you would have to run an ultrasonic cleaner for a very, very, very long time for that to happen, but I suppose theoretically that is a possibility. Once again, physician engineering friends, help me out if I'm utterly wrong here. The idea here was that because of that water temperature rising with the ultrasonic vibrations, metal parts inside the pen, like the piston, say, actually expanded, and that caused the precious resin, which is, in my mind, quite thin in Mont Blancs, to crack. Obviously, that's a bad thing. I've never experienced that, but then again, I'm just thinking, I don't think I really put metal parts while they're in the pen in an ultrasonic cleaner. Typically, if a nib and feed come out, I will take them out, put them into the cleaner separately. And I have never really put a whole pen body in an ultrasonic cleaner. I tend to put maybe a section in or a nib and feed in, but not the whole pen, because I'm always afraid that water will somehow seep into parts where it should not be and then get stuck there, for example, behind a piston, and then you may have other issues. That was not the real question. The real question was, so no ebonite feeds then. And I'm guessing that's referring to a similar issue of ebonite. When it warms up, it can become a little pliable, and then theoretically it could bend out of shape in the warmth. And then when you take it out, then it's bent and it's no longer the shape it used to have. I'm assuming that was a specific issue that was being referred to. And yeah, I suppose that could happen. But again, then you would really need to get the water quite warm. So what I usually do is I have a little ultrasonic cleaner. It's really quite small. And I put in the parts I want to put in. And I run the cleaner. Mine has a timer, so it will stop itself. You also have ultrasonic cleaners, especially industrial ones, that you just have an on switch and they'll go until you hit the on switch again. The one I have has a maximum of 480 seconds. And so then a little alarm beeps and I take the water out. Usually because it's dirty. At that point it's inky water. And I put new water in and I make sure I put cold water in. And then I can put the parts in again. So I think if you do it that way, I think you should be okay. But yeah, maybe an ebonite feed, maybe it's not a great idea if you want to make sure it doesn't warp or anything. Okay, the final question that I have, I hope that made a bit of sense. The final question I have is a slightly more philosophical one, which is, how do you decide whether or not to buy a pen? So a specific pen, right? Like what you're looking at this and you say, I want this or I don't want that. That's the question. And I gave that some thought. And I think for me, there are a couple of considerations. The first consideration is, can I afford it? And I don't want to be facetious but this is a very realistic question. Can I actually afford to buy this pen? And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes you're looking at something that's really expensive, and it would not be wise to purchase that at that point. And I really don't think we should overlook that. It's become easier and easier to buy things on credit, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should also do that. This, by the way, is sometimes people ask me that, one of the big cultural differences between Europe, where I grew up, and North America, where I live now, is that here everything's bought in credit. So if you go to buy a $5 magazine, then you put that on a credit card. That's fairly unheard of in the part of Europe where I grew up. Credit card is really reserved typically for bigger purchases or unexpected sudden purchases, and not every single fast food meal, every magazine, every newspaper, every set of groceries is put in a credit card. I'm not commenting on it in a negative sense. I'm just saying it's a cultural difference. So given that, especially in North America, it's very common, is whip out a credit card, you have a $10,000 limit, a $15,000 limit on a credit card, it becomes very easy to purchase a $5,000 pen. All you need to do is whip out the card and you're good to go. But then if you can't pay that credit card bill, obviously it becomes an issue. So I really don't think that's something to overlook. Ask yourself if you can really afford this. The second question that it took a while for me to really internalize and to really learn that it's an important question, but one that I ask myself a lot now is, but do I actually need this? There's a difference between wanting and needing, right? Like, strictly speaking, I suppose you could say we don't need any fountain pens, but I think you know what I mean. Sometimes you really want something because it's shiny or flashy or it looks really cool. And at the end of the day, you end up not really needing that. You just really wanted it. And sometimes you want something and you end up really liking it, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think many of us can relate to the idea of, you saw something that you thought would be awesome, you thought would be wonderful, and you want to get it, and you end up purchasing it, and then it's kind of a letdown, or it's not as great as you thought it would be. So that want versus need distinction, I think, is a very important one. And once you start to think in those kinds of terms, I just don't really need this, I just kind of wanted it, it becomes easier to talk yourself out of something. Now, sometimes, as I said, sometimes it's really nice to treat yourself to something that is a gift to yourself. I think that's a very good thing to do once in a while, as long as you can pay all your bills, and it's something that you've decided that you really want, you really like that specific thing. Another thing that comes to play for me is, I really like to try out pens before I buy them, but I can't always. In Europe, that was easier. There were a lot more fountain pen stores there than there are in North America. But having said that, it's simply not always possible. The distance may be too big, or I find myself in a position now where the pens that I am attracted towards are not available in pen stores. So these are more special purchases that I find on eBay, or maybe at a pen show, although I have not been at a pen show in years. But it is more that kind of stuff than that it is the newest Lamy or the newest whatever. This is not a reflection on those brands. This is not a reflection on pen stores. This is just a reflection of my tastes, which have become just odd. I have said this before, and I will repeat this. I'm in a very fortunate position as a pen reviewer that all sorts of companies send me all sorts of things. And as a result, I've been able to try out hundreds and hundreds of pens. I think I just past 2,000 videos. Those are not all unique pen videos, but let's face it, a lot of them are individual reviews of pens. So I have tried hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pens. So I now know what I like and I know what I don't like, and I'll tell you about it. But that matters too. So I know that there is a pen store in Calgary. I know I can go there tomorrow and I will not find anything that I would like to buy. And that's not a reflection on that pen store. It's just my taste that have evolved that way. So if you can try out something, then do so, but it's not always possible. I suppose this is not really pen buying advice, so I'm not going to go into how do you know if the seller you're buying from on eBay is reliable. You don't. You look at their ratings, but you don't. But this is more the psychological aspect of how do you come to the decision to buy a pen. So for me, again, can I afford it? Do I really want this? Or do I maybe think I want this because it's shiny and cute and fun and it looks like it would be something I would enjoy? And then I think the final question is this a pen that fits you? Is it really something that in the long run you may want to keep and that you enjoy using and that gives you enjoyment while you use it? If the answer to all those questions is yes, well then by all means buy it. But if you're kind of on the fence, I wouldn't do it. So those are just some considerations that I have found help me in my decision making. That's kind of what I have. So I hope those ideas answer that question. Let me know what your considerations are. If you feel that you've made some sort of discoveries about how you get to your decision making on whether or not to purchase a pen, I would like to read what you say. So there we have it. Hope this was useful. Hope the new microphone has worked. And that's it. I'll gladly see you later.